Gary Bettman has announced that the NHL will be, all things being okay, will be coming back for a Stanley Cup playoffs June, July, probably July, maybe into August. And then there's the draft lottery. Well, there's a lot of stuff to chew on here, whether we like it, whether we don't like it, whether it's a good idea, whether it's a bad idea, whether some is good, whether some is bad. Let's dive down that rabbit hole. If coronavirus abates, or if they find some way to socially distance, or if players can be tested, or, we may be seeing a Stanley Cup playoffs in July and in August. Let's start there. Bubba O'Neill, you up for that? Or is it a million degrees and, hey, let's cut bait and move on to the next season?
Well, I guess there is an appetite. I think the first thing that Commissioner Gary Bettman said in his chat, which really was the first time he has actually talked on behalf of the league publicly. I know he's done these little side talks with CNBC and Sportsnet and TSN, but this is the first time he's actually addressed the playoff situation. And I guess I like it. I think it's the only fair way to go about it. But there are some confusing things to me. And I guess ultimately for the National Hockey League, who I believe are the most desperate to get going again and to finish and complete their season.
Short of the CFL.
Sorry. Well, yeah, maybe sure. So. And I know there's a big argument about what's the big four or what's the big four, but I'm speaking of the North American pro sports. I think they're the ones that need to get going the most, and they want to hand out that cup. I'm just wondering, what if the Montreal Canadiens beat the Pittsburgh Penguins in that first round? A team that was not destined to be in the postseason. The Chicago Blackhawks in a similar situation. How fair is that? I know you want to get those teams involved because they were maybe borderline teams, but I'm just wondering how those top-level teams will feel if they do get upset in the first round.
Bubba, you don't want those teams involved, Bubba, because those are almost teams or close teams. You want those involved because Montreal, because New York Rangers, because Chicago are big markets. Yep. That's the only reason we're in the playoffs right now. Rick, I don't know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I don't think this has anything to do with hockey, even though Gary Bettman yesterday unbelievably said, oh, this has nothing to do with economics. This has everything to do with economics.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, these are the National Hockey League is an entertainment business. There's multimillionaires, there's billionaires involved, and right now they're not making money. And in fact, many of them are losing money because they still have bills to pay. So this is not to save face, this is to save the season. And the way to do that is to launch into this 24-team playoff format. Get more teams involved, get those bigger markets involved. I know we're going to talk about the hub cities and whether these or where these events should be played or where these tournaments should be played. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, this is entirely a business decision. Yeah, from a fan perspective, we want to see hockey. We're in the off season right now. It's been March 11th since the last game was played. We are now in the off season. So training camps are going to begin early July. The season might begin late July or early August. The next season's not going to begin until January. So right now, I think the planning has to be almost picture perfect. I know there's a lot of unknowns with testing and whether the second wave is upon us within weeks, if not a matter of days or months. The big unknown is, what happens next. But yeah, the fact of the matter is this is a business decision and they're trying to save and make some money.
Well, I think there's all kinds of aspects, Rick, of what this is in terms of a business decision. Of course, I think that's part of the round robin for the 8 teams that finished near the top. You might be able to argue in that they, by doing that as part of the regular season, they might actually meet their contractual obligations to their local TV market, right? So those 8 teams themselves might pick up a little there by calling that actually part of the regular season because you're determining where they actually finish, right? So that's part of it. But the other part, there's another part of it too, which is the whole, I don't know if it's a threat. I would say it was a threat by the league to say if Canada holds its decision of 2 weeks quarantine, then the Canadian teams can just forget about being hub cities. And I think that also has a very strong economic thing to it. Well, what you're saying is to Canada, look, do you think this will be an economic generator? And most likely Edmonton, because it's got the record of all the places right now. Do you think that wouldn't be an economic generator there, especially Mr. Trudeau, in an area where you're struggling, Western Canada? So that economic part could drive a political thing to get them a speed up exception on this potentially.
Does anybody in the group like the 24 teams? To me, you add the 24 teams instead of 16, and you've rendered everything that happened until this point irrelevant and stupid.
I see the practicality of it. I don't like the numbers, Scott, but I think the practicality is when you're looking at 16, look at how many teams look at the difference between 14 and 18 last year, right? Or maybe not much last year, but in the year before for sure. Look at that difference, and you're going to have some teams really. This was a compromise here, so that's the 7 you're talking. You're saying you weren't making this anyways. So yeah, there's an argument Montreal probably.
Isn't Buffalo, I think, 2 points or 3 points behind Montreal? So why not extend it to
But that's not the
Buffalo?
difference between 16th. That's not between the difference of making it at 16th, which was the real cutoff before.
No, but if we're going to say that this is to make the teams, to give the teams a chance who are really close, well, then Buffalo should be in too. And then whoever's after them should be in. And let's make it all 30, except for Detroit, because they were so bad they don't deserve to be in here. They get to play in the NHL championship.
Well, there's got to be a demarcation point, I think. You can't do it logistically. You can't get 750 players in one.
But here's the thing, guys, is that I think to satisfy their television partners, let's be honest, as we talked about, finances have a lot to do with this in the books, which we don't really know a lot about. NBC are on the last leg of last year of their contract, next year of their television contract, which I believe was a 10-year, $100 million deal. Sportsnet are losing money. They have been getting pounded on their NHL contract. And what this offers right now is the opportunity to have 6 of their 7 Canadian teams in the playoffs. And we have long said, and we have long known that in this country that people are fans of their team. And for whatever reason, there's a big portion of the population of each fan base that depart once their team are eliminated. So if you get all 6 teams, 6 of the 7 teams minus Ottawa, you're feeling pretty good about people watching your product right now. So I think that's a big factor in terms of course, we talked about having the big American markets. LA, minus LA, that would be the only one that really isn't getting anything at this point.
I think the other thing that you have to consider is adding 24 teams, so adding 8 more teams to this playoff system adds a little more risk to the league in terms of players, trainers, coaches, referees, linesmen testing positive. And we know that one positive test, we've read the articles, we've heard them on radio, we've seen bits on TV, that one positive test is not going to derail the whole tournament. But and I know that players are going to be tested before bed, so they get the results, in the morning, and they'll be disqualified if they do get a positive test. But the fact of the matter is, adding so many more players and officials and support staff to the mix, the NHL is opening itself up to a little more risk in terms of positive tests.
But it also is opening itself up to a lot more risk, Rick. I was going to get those 2 words backwards. Risk, Rick. If you have the 24th or 23rd team suddenly get a goalie that goes out of his mind and they go on and win this thing, and they should never have been in there in the first place, and then they are in the draft lottery and win the draft lottery. How do you could conceivably have a team that should not have even been in the playoffs, that gets into the playoffs, that wins the Stanley Cup and wins the draft lottery, which credibility-wise, I mean, maybe people forget that and they yawn, but that's a killer. That's a killer.
It's only in the short term and only for people who care. And remember, not that many people, not the market the NHL is going after. They already have us. We're not going to stop watching, and we can say it's terrible. But the people that will think that way, Scott, and I agree with you, it's a very it's an asterisk type of thing, like it's a triple asterisk in a lot of ways. Even the people that agree with that, they're not going to stop watching this game for any reason. It's the people that they're after, which is expanding the game. They could not give a flying you-know-what.
So for clarity's sake on the draft lottery, so the 7 teams that are not going to participate in this 24-team tournament are already locked into their top 7 places in terms of the ping pong balls. The 8 teams that are going to be eliminated from this best-of-5 play-in series are also going to be slotted into the draft lottery. So you could not win the cup and get the top or even any of the ping pong balls in the draft lottery. I know it's very confusing because if any of those 8 teams that are bounced from the play-in series win any of the top 3 picks in the draft lottery, they got to do the draft lottery again. And I'm not going to explain phase 2 of the draft lottery because it's even more disturbing.
Can you imagine the discussions that went on about this? Can you imagine what these discussions were like?
Here's what should have happened with the NHL. Here's if the NHL wants great television, and they do, here's what you should have done. You should have called all the general managers for every team in the league and had a televised event and say, you have a choice. You can be in the playoffs or in the draft lottery. And have the general manager stand up and announce, we're going to contend for the cup this year, or we're going to go into the draft lottery. We're going to pull ourselves out of the playoffs. Now, all the teams at the top would have gone for it, every one of them. But if you're in those bottom teams that may not have made the playoffs and you're not sure, it would have been scintillating television to watch. And then when we see what happens down the road, let's say you're a guy who finished 18th and you go, no, we're going to try for the draft lottery, and you get the 18th pick. Now the second guessing, or vice versa, you are a good team and you pull out and you win the draft. I think there was all kinds of opportunities to be more creative than this mishmash.
Well, I think that I know your joke.
Very confusing. I just found it extremely confusing. I feel like all 4 of us are pretty intelligent people, and I think we're all a little baffled on the actual process of this draft, which, interesting enough, has quite possibly a once-a-decade generational player in Alexis Lafreniere at the number 1 position. So I find it a little confusing, and I was hoping it wouldn't be so confusing.
Well, back to the tournament itself, I think what we're looking at here is a couple of things. Remember that this same group of owners, close to it, already have a no Stanley Cup year on their record, right? Not that long ago. They really want to make sure they didn't, and of course the guy at the top would be the only commissioner who would have had 2 no championship years other than Warriors on his record probably in any major sport. Would I be right about that? I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Right? So, and including the people around him who are trying to grow the game. And that would be the much longer lasting effect of not having this. So the other way that I think that we can look at this is, and this is the way they'll position it. You don't look at what you don't have. And that's what we've been looking at here, right? Generally, what didn't happen? What are the things that, what did happen here? What you have here is essentially a World Cup, right? It's a tournament. It's the way that the NBA is going to position theirs for sure, which is March Madness for the pros, right? So, and we like March Madness.
Let me throw one more thing in about this one, because there also are 10 hub cities that are in the mix. 2 of them are going to be chosen. This is obviously a secondary issue because there aren't going to be fans in the stands. So it's more of a, where do we put these things? But again, I'm looking at this, shaking my head when I look at one of the teams that's a hub city. Their fans are great. The game presentation is great. But the average temperature in Las Vegas in July is 41 degrees, and Vegas is one of your hub cities. Like, this is part of the reason, too, why I look at this and I go, they're not even really taking this seriously, it doesn't seem. If you're honestly proposing Vegas. If there were fans, sure. Come on.
Well, you had the Stanley Cup there in late June. You had a Stanley Cup there in late June, right? So
I don't mind Las Vegas. I think it's an event city. Things are going on. You have all the hotels, and you've got a million things going on. Scott, I kind of felt the same way about Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 2 cities to choose from, and Columbus, Ohio will be one of the places. That blows me away.
But Bobby,
I think the biggest news on this is if they don't choose a Canadian city, and we know why they wouldn't if the border closure to non-essential travel is still in effect. That ends on June the 21st. We know that training camps aren't going to start until July, so there is some breathing room for the National Hockey League and the federal government here in Canada to make that decision. And we understand that this decision on the 2 hub cities isn't going to be made or doesn't have to be made for another 4 or 5 weeks. So there's potentially a Canadian destination. My guess would be Edmonton as well. The ice is always the best in the National Hockey League. They have hotels. They have a lot of practice rinks that teams can participate in. So Edmonton would probably be the choice in Canada. As for Las Vegas, despite the temperature, we don't know what the ice is going to be like. Yeah, there's a million hotels there. So I think staging a tournament there would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, but as far as Bubba's idea that it's an event city, which of course it is, that is great if you're going to have an event, but you can't have fans and the players aren't supposed to go out of their hotel rooms. The last thing you want is to put a bunch of players who can't leave their room because of coronavirus in a place like Vegas. That to me is like, build a rink for the same price this would cost to put on in East Boogaloo, Saskatchewan, up north, and say there's nothing else to do. There you go. And we'll, you know, but look.
Well, don't forget. I mean, this whole discussion's been about money, right? And you rightly started it off that way. And think about the NHL in Vegas and money.
Yes.
And think about what the connection there is already. Think about what's going to be happening in Vegas over the next year or two, which is another team, another major league team coming there. So I think Vegas looks sense to me for all the main reasons of having those empty hotels, and there's a ton of space, and I'm sure they're going to be coming up with some money for. They've got the ability to come up with the money because of the casino money that, you know, that the big corporations have to be able to put up, to say, hey, just at least put some people in our building and give us a chance to supply them some food and those kind of things. But it's also the relationship, the perceived relationship between the NHL and Vegas, right? They want to make sure people, that's where they have their show, their big show event and that kind of thing. I think they want to keep that going.
Steve, that's true. But if you're putting it in Vegas, you are asking for positive tests because there's no chance the players are staying in their hotel rooms, unlike in other places. There's no, some will, but you're just begging for positive tests. Whereas if you put it somewhere that doesn't have those temptations, you have a much better chance of pulling this thing off if it happens at all.
Well, if you got to worry about that in this situation for those players, it's going to happen wherever you put it, because it's just going to be a little less chance of it, is all I'm saying. If that's really going to be a thing where the players are going to be tempted by something, and I wouldn't think, you know, I don't think they're crazy, you know.
I think there's a lot of temptations in East Boogaloo, Saskatchewan.
I would agree.
Well, depends what the tourist attractions are in East Boogaloo. I'm going around the horn really quickly before we wrap. Simple yes or no, because all of this could be moot. Yes or no, starting with Steve. Yes or no, will this whole thing actually happen, or is this just talk?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes, it will happen.
Bubba?
Oh, of course it's going to happen. They want it to happen real bad.
That is unanimous. I don't know that it'll finish. I don't know what's going to happen with it, because who knows once you get all these people together what happens, but I will wrap that with an agreement that yes, it will somehow, some way, it will happen. What do you think? Our Twitter accounts are on the screen. They're going to come up at the end. You can get in contact with us. We love to hear from you. While you're here, subscribe down below, hit the notification button so you know when the home games videos come up. Guys, thanks for doing this, folks. We will talk to you soon.